Welcome to the Cowboy Up Podcast, where talk is all about the West. This episode is brought to you by White Stallion Ranch and produced by Cowboy Spirit USA. Sometimes the best way to begin helping nature is to observe nature. That's exactly what Valer Clark did when she moved from the East Coast to Arizona. 40 years later, the results of her land conservation have been astounding. Valer, along with her colleague Jeff Hampton, joins Russell and Ellen to talk about her work restoring watersheds, protecting the land, and launching the nonprofit Cuenca Los Ojos.
Morning, Alan. How are you?
Well, always glad to be here. I say that every week, and I am always glad the next week.
I hope it never changes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess monsoon season's officially over. I saw somewhere that, and I've seen different dates, but this one is the one I most recently saw, June 15th to September 30th. Tucson, they're saying, had the hottest and driest season on record. I think the key is because it didn't seem, everybody was whining extra this year, but I didn't think it was that much hotter than normal.
Well, Tucson's hot, so it means you're used to it.
Yeah, and they get the, Phoenix numbers get the press, and we're 8 degrees or so cooler, so yeah. What is pretty scorching in Phoenix is just hot here. But I guess 4.7 inches of rain fell. That's an inch less than usual. Doesn't sound like a lot, but percentage-wise, quite a bit, really.
Well, I always look at it as how much vegetation grows. The vegetation grows from the rainfall, and sometimes you get all that 4 inches or most of it in one rain, and then not a lot grows. I mean, it'll grow right after that. But so how it falls is important as how much.
Well, and of course, we're talking to the perfect people today about water conservation. It's people have always been aware of the issue in Arizona and the Southwest, but it seems to be more and more in the bullseye right now, and it should be. Today we have two individuals they've done groundbreaking, phenomenal work with water restoration. Valer Clark is here. She's been restoring watersheds for almost 40 years. I think some of it was a bit going rogue for a while, and then she turned the world around. And in 2018, she founded and funded the nonprofit Cuenca Los Ojos here in the U.S. and Cuenca Los Ojos AC in Mexico. Serves on all kinds of boards, including Borderlands Restoration Network. Her outstanding conservation efforts have been recognized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and the U.S. Geological Survey, as well as Nature Conservancy. I was fortunate to be at her retirement event. She's received all kinds of awards, among them the National Wetlands Award, the Tucson Museum of Contemporary Art's Local Genius Award, and she brought along Jeff Hampton, longtime friend of ours. He's the president of Cuenca Los Ojos. Farming and cattle background in Indiana and Arizona. His father, Wells, founded Coronado Cattle Company in 1967, and it ended up being one of the most respected feeding operations in Arizona. His 50-year career in Arizona real estate led to an appreciation for the need for land conservation in the creation of quality livable communities. He served as Arizona Land and Water Trust for 27 years. I do some of these things in 27 years. That's a long time. He served on numerous boards, including the Mountain Oyster Club and the Tucson Botanical Gardens. So we're really thrilled. The show's over now because of your lengthy accomplishments, but thanks. But we're really happy to have you guys at the ranch with us today. So thank you.
We're happy to be here.
Well, I'm thrilled. I want to first do a little background. What turned you around, or not turned around? What got you into water conservation and directing your life in that way?
Well, that's a good question, because when I grew up, I was in a city, New York City, and I never thought very much about water, because back east, 40 inches of water is the norm, and nobody asked how much rain there was.
You turn on the tap and the water comes.
There, yeah, exactly. And you really didn't see the sky. There were skyscrapers, but you didn't really see the sky the way you do out here. So when I got out here, it was 40-some years ago, and I was petrified. First of all, I was petrified that there was so little water available, and I didn't see how anybody could live. Russell said that, that people used to it, but I couldn't fathom how they lived. The second thing is, during the monsoon season, the water came down so fast and so violently, and it was ripping the sides of the canyons where there was little grass on them, taking all that off the mountainside. And I thought, nature's destroying itself. This is not natural. Something must be going on, and I've got to figure out how to capture this water and make it go into the ground.
And you go a little deeper into what focused you on that. How did you arrive from the east, and all of a sudden you were concerned about water going in the ground? How did that occur?
Well, it occurred because I went out and watched it happen, and then I said, you know what, I've got to study nature. So I went out and I looked at places that were dry and had exposed rock. I looked at places that had quite a lot of grasses and hadn't been timbered or had more trees on it. And I looked at the difference of what was happening. In the hills with more trees and more grasses, the water that came down in the gullies, it came down slower because it was not as much water coming all in one spot, and it was going into the ground where the grasses and the trees were, and in the gullies, the water would push rocks into a position so that it formed little dams. And I thought, aha, that's a good idea. And then I went to places where there was very little vegetation, and I saw it all running off really fast, really full of dirt, and it disappeared, and the week later, the ground really wasn't saturated, and the water was gone. So that made me think about it.
So you did sort of on-the-ground research, so to speak, is what you're talking about. You went and saw varied, of course, Arizona's so diverse. Is that what, because I don't know the timing, is that what inspired you to go buy ranches?
No.
Or did you buy ranches and then discover the problem?
We bought a ranch before. We came out here, and it happened by accident. We bid on a ranch during a vacation. I didn't think we'd get it because we bid so low, but
you didn't know how poor the rancher was.
Yeah, and Walter Armour, who was the agent, said, I've got some good news and some bad news for you. And I said, well, I'll take the good news first. You got the ranch. I've got some bad news for you. You got the ranch.
Yeah, I can see that.
That's an old story, but still one of the better stories floating.
That was the El Coronado Ranch in Turkey Creek.
Oh, yeah.
In the Chiricahuas. You bought it from CTR Bates?
CTR Bates, yes.
And I don't know that name.
Old time accountant and.
So that was your first ranch, and that's where I met you the first time. You may or may not remember. And El Coronado is it's famous as a cattle ranch historically.
Yes.
But wasn't it? Who was it? The guy from Tombstone White owned it for a while, didn't he? But anyway, it was also a dude ranch.
It was a dude ranch, yeah. It was a school, boys' school. It was also it started out as a ranch, and then then during the war, Officers Club, I think, and then it's been through several different projects.
I like it. Can you tell the story about why the lady, I don't remember her name, started the dude ranch?
Ainsworth, I think her name was. She came down from the state of Washington with a car that was driven by her chauffeur, and he happened to be black. And he and she, at the end of many weeks of driving, ended up in Douglas. And they went into the Gadsden to get a room for the night, and the Gadsden wouldn't allow them to stay there because they didn't allow a black person to stay there in their hotel. And so she said, that's it. She stomped out, and she said, I'm going to put them out of business. And so she went up into the Chiricahuas thinking, this is the prettiest spot in the whole area. I'm going to build a hotel here and put them out of business.
I like her thinking. That's interesting.
Can't miss that story, right? Isn't that a... So El Coronado, back your first ranch, and I've been there, and I've seen the end result of what was groundbreaking. Is that a fair statement?
I think so. When I started, of course, I didn't have any idea what would come of it. I was just trying to fix eroded areas. But a group of men came up from Mexico, and they knew how to build these structures. And I said, you have a job for as long as you want, and they'd come for half a year, and then they'd go home and they'd come back again. And I got them papers for agricultural papers, because that, at the time, you could have migrant workers for a period of time, and then they'd go back, which was great for ranchers. It was great for farmers. It was great because we didn't need them. We didn't need 400 employees for all year. You needed them 1 month or and then they go on to other places. So we needed them for half a year, and we had about half a dozen every year come for 20 years. And we saw the results within 5 years.
Well, let's back up a little. Let's talk about results, or let's talk about what was wrong. Water was eroding off the land and leaving, right, and not penetrating enough and not benefiting. That's correct. Where you started?
Yes.
And then you thought, need to do something about this, need to keep the water here?
Yes.
And I think it's often they're called loose rock structures now, sort of in a general sense, but trincheras and gabions, can you describe, because that's what you did, right?
Yes. I learned all of this later, but I didn't know what to call them. But trincheras are loose rock structures where you don't have anything holding the rocks together. But you put them together in a way that it's like a puzzle. When the water comes, it knocks them into place all close. It knits them closer together if you do it right. The word gabion applies to a much larger structure where you need to put in wire baskets and fill them with rocks. And this you would do in an area where you don't have a lot of rocks available around you. You need to put them into silted. In Mexico, we were in the valley, and so we were catching water from hundreds of miles. We were a funnel for that water, and we needed a huge structure that really was fitted into silt, almost like talcum powder, the soil was, because it was a valley soil. And so you needed to have some more fortification. And the idea wasn't to have a beautiful structure, to keep the structure there, because some of these would break out with big events. And they'd say, well, they don't work. Yes, they work. It's like what nature does, puts rocks in together. It rearranges them. And it rearranges the vegetation, and it takes out some and it plants some. But it because of all the silt that's built up behind the structure, the nature has a lot to work with. And so I say even if it breaks, it's a success because it slowed the river down and it's rearranged the rocks in a way that they need to be, and it has done its purpose. It's built up. I think it's a success when you build up the riverbed 15 feet, say, and that all becomes a sponge. And so you're holding water underground and surface water of a stream that didn't run all year round now holds water either underground flowing or in places for 5 miles. So that, for me, is a success.
So I'm not trying to take words out of your mouth, but I'm trying to understand it. Water was leaving the property without enough penetration and going somewhere else, and so you want to slow the water down or stop it so that it'll penetrate and then stay on the land instead of leaving. Am I saying that right or wrong?
You're correct, and we didn't have much vegetation, and the secret was vegetation came in. The minute we slowed the water down, we were able to put vegetation. In the beginning, we planted some willows and some cottonwoods with just sticking them in the ground where there was water. But can we take that one back, because I want to explain? It took a couple of years for the water to come in, because the river was so straight and there was no vegetation, and it was just rushing through, so that it didn't stay very long. And when we put these structures in, the silt dropped behind the gabion, and that water stayed there. It didn't evaporate, but it went underground slowly. And after 5 years of doing this, we found that maybe 5 feet down, there was water all the time. So we could put in pole plantings of trees, and that started the process. And now the seeds from those trees blow farther south, and it's like a lawn of little trees coming up in the south, to the south of us. So this is how the process started, but we jump-started it with these large...
And this is this Mexico you're talking about, with this straight river and the high volume.
Yes.
Is that fair? And you came to a place that had really been, and of course not just the water goes down, the topsoil goes down, right? And it's all lost. But at El Coronado, which was your beginning, your experimental project, you were, I think, Jeff's told me, using trincheras
right,
and starting at wherever the water started.
Right. With trincheras, we started at the top of the mountain. And you put them close together where it was steep, and you put them farther apart where it was less steep. And you didn't need to have any structure, because the rocks were there, and trees were there, and you could fix this little rock dam into the sides, and you didn't need fortification.
So the goal is to get more water penetrating in the ground and not running off. Would that be the goal?
Yes, I mean, it stays in the ground longer, and actually the science that was done on our property afterwards says that the temperature dropped where we had this.
Temperature dropped in the ground or on the surface or what?
Surface.
I need to follow you here.
The temperature, because there was so much vegetation and it was cooler, was several degrees cooler than other places.
Due to the evaporation.
And the vegetation.
The vegetation, really.
Yeah.
Transpiration.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's the whole. It was a mini environment there, which changed radically from what had been there before.
No, I just.
So we're just gonna stop for 1 second, and we're gonna take a break, and we're gonna listen to Stuart Rosebrook of True West. He's our good friend, editor of True West magazine, and we always like to get that update.
Thank you, Russell. Hey, this is great to be back on the Cowboy Up podcast talking about True West magazine. We have got a great November 2023 issue. Our cover is dedicated to the U.S. Marshals who served out of Fort Smith and in Oklahoma during the wild and woolly territorial days of Oklahoma and the Indian Territory. And our cover story honors 10 of the most important U.S. Marshals and Deputy Marshals to serve their country. We also uncovered, while doing this research, really a bittersweet and also dramatic story of how over 70 years, 104 deputy U.S. Marshals were killed in the line of service. It's quite remarkable. Fortunately, we haven't lost a U.S. Marshal in Oklahoma since the mid-1930s. But as we reflect on that story, which was written for us by David Turk, the U.S. Marshal Service historian, we also have a very interesting story called The Reign of Terror, how the Osage murders in Oklahoma in the 1920s led to the rise of the FBI. People might be familiar with this story as it's coming out in movie theaters from a big Martin Scorsese movie adapted from the book Killers of the Flower Moon. It comes out October 20th, and I think our readers and those who are interested in the West are going to bring their interest up into the 1920s, the 1930s, and it's going to be a very reflective movie. But I think it's time for us to push what we think of the Old West well into the 20th century. We also have a young author from Australia who's written a kind of an opinion piece on the film Django Unchained. It's rattled a few cages and ruffled a few feathers, but I think he makes a good point that we have to continue to look at how the Western builds on the past and the present, and who will be the stars in the future, and give credit a little bit to some of these younger filmmakers and stars who love the West and are making films about it. And then we've got a great article in here on Tombstone, and a great place to go for the weekend in the fall and visit throughout the year. One of our favorite places in the West. And I think Russell will probably tell you there's a great place to stay down there, the Tombstone Monument Ranch. So with that, I hope that you all enjoy the November issue, and maybe even take a peek at Phil Spangenberger's article, Guns of the Young Wild West. If you really enjoy collecting recreations of the great guns of the West, Phil's article is for you. Thank you very much. Talk to you guys next month.
Tell us a little bit about your organization. Who were members and how you organized, and especially what are your goals?
Where we go?
Your goals.
I'll start with the goals then. Our goals is to enhance and grow a wildlife preserve on the border of the United States and Mexico, on the Mexican side, which now is not large enough to accommodate all the animals that have been coming up from the south. They smell water, and we've been increasing the water on the land. Animals smell it, and they come to that part, and we've had quite a lot of sighting of the jaguar that has come in. We have mountain lion, we have bear, we have bobcats and ocelots, and tremendous number of animals that really require a larger preserve. So the first goal is to grow the preserve, but in growing it, we invite people on to the property to learn about how to manage land sustainably. So we have some cattle, and we have used them as tools, and we're seeing great results with how we're using them. And we're also putting water back into the ground, which is our chief mission, and that we're teaching
through the gabions and all that.
Through the gabions and the trincheras.
Yeah.
And we have groups of students coming down to learn about that. So it's a teaching preserve and a preserve for wildlife. That's the goal.
And so it's 100 and how many thousand acres? 120?
Yeah.
120,000, and then you manage another 50.
More. Yeah.
And so to provide proper habitat for the animals that are coming in because they're smelling the water, and how much do you need, do you think?
Well, I don't know enough about studying of jaguars, but I know that they cover a lot of land, and I can't you'd have to talk to the scientists about this. They're studying now what our land offers and how much we need. But
why does it stop at the international border? Why doesn't it slop over into the U.S.? And what are the politics involved, and why it's all in Mexico and comes right up to the border and then stops?
Well, two things. Stops now because there's a wall, but before, the landowners on the northern side in Arizona and in New Mexico, they were good ranchers and had in mind habitat for wildlife as well. So it doesn't have to stop at the border. But right now, with the politics and the fear of people coming across from Mexico or from many countries, that it's the border situation now is just horrific. How many people are there? I think there was thousands of people waiting to cross, and it's politics. That's why it's not coming into the States.
And is it fair to say you basically reallocated your assets because you sold a couple of ranches in the U.S.
Right.
and have dedicated your focus to Mexico? Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, yes. But I sold to ranchers that I felt would be keep it in open land and not develop it. So that was I couldn't do everything. I couldn't do that in Mexico and everything. And I gave the land in Mexico to Cuenca Los Ojos, which is the organization that will manage it into the future.
And that means in English?
Cuenca is a watershed, and it's also an eye socket. And ojos are springs, and they're also eyes. So it's a way of seeing things that's different, and it's a watershed of springs. And my daughter said, Mom, that's not a good name because nobody can spell Cuenca or know Cuenca what it is. And you ask Americans what a watershed is, and they'll say, well, it's a building you hold the water in. So thank goodness that she's going to be taking over after me because I did things in kind of a goofy way.
Well, you were a pioneer. I mean, and is it true what I remember from Jeff and just knowing what little I know, the trincheras and gabions, these are thoughts you had, but then they were doing this in Mexico. Is that true? There's some long history there that
I didn't have a chance to see them before we started doing it. But there's a town called Trincheras, not too far away in Sonora. And it's a mountainside that's just a series of steps all the way up. Now, it's not used now, but I hope this what we're doing or something similar to slow the water down will take off. And that's my hope for the future, that the success we've had will encourage people. I think it was the best investment I made at Coronado, all told, the best investment I made.
How many trincheras do you estimate?
Well, we don't know, but we say close to 20,000.
That's the number I read. Yeah.
On El Coronado.
On El Coronado.
60,000 in Mexico, maybe.
Maybe, I don't know. But
some 10 feet big and some quarter mile long, kind of thing.
In Mexico?
Wherever.
In the States, they were from very small to say something that's 8 or 10 feet wide and 3 feet high. That's in the mountains without any structures. So that's sort of the size gauge. And we did.
And that was that size because you could build that and not have to get a permit or anything else. You could just build those and it would work with the land. It was
because it was physically the way.
Physically could make it work.
Possible.
Yeah. The mountains.
But we didn't have a permit, and we did a lot of things on national forests, but they're happy now that we did it.
Let me just tell the story Valer won't tell you. she needed she put these trincheras in on her deeded land first, and a lot of them washed out. So she realized she needed to go up to the ridge tops and start there and work down. But the ridge tops were Forest Service. So she just did it anyway. And and it really worked. But then the Forest Service found out about it, and they weren't happy. And they came out, and when they saw the results and they saw how well it worked, and you don't use machinery or anything like that to do this, they now are very supportive.
So they turned the corner.
They turned the corner, as did the national or the NRCS also, and they now support this process not only here in Arizona but elsewhere in the West.
And they'll support it with money, right, Jeff?
Yes.
So let's talk about El Coronado. You've handed it off to someone who's going to take care of it. You're pretty comfortable with he wants to ranch it right. Turkey Creek was flowed sporadically and now flows how?
Well, I haven't been there in the last 3 years, but I know that when I took this potential buyer up to it, he looked, the minute we got on the ranch, he went, oh my God, it's really different. So something was going on. I mean, we put some fish back in the stream, a chub and a dace, and they still are there. You don't see water running after a bad year everywhere, but there are always pools of water. The wildlife has increased, according to people with cameras.
And you reintroduced a species or subspecies of wild turkey?
We did, yes, the Gould's turkey. And we did 4 reintroductions of Gould's turkeys, and they've taken off, and now they're going to different canyons.
You mentioned, I think you're talking about Mexico when you said it, but you're using cattle, I think, to quote you, as a tool.
Correct. When we took the cattle off when we first got the ranches, and after about 10 years, I wasn't sure that the grasses would be coming back in, because it looked like there were less grasses in the valle. That the space between the grasses was getting larger. And some ranchers from Chihuahua came over, and they said they looked at the situation, and I didn't see much grass there, and I didn't see how cows would really like to be there. And they said, you should put some cows on this. And I'm going, really? What are they going to eat? You know, I mean, I didn't come as a full-fledged rancher. I came from New York City, and what I've learned from ranchers that have been doing it for a long time. And they said, yeah, you should put some cattle here. So we did, and we noticed a big change in the following year. Now, we got a lot of rain that year, but even so, grasses came back because the seeds are in the ground maybe, I don't know, 20 years they can last in the ground, maybe longer, I don't know. And we took them and put them on other ranches that really had been overgrazed tremendously.
Took them cattle, you'd say.
Cattle.
Is that them?
Yes.
Yeah.
We took them?
Yeah.
We took the cattle.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify.
We took the cattle, not the ranchers. We took the cattle. We approved of what the ranchers told us. We took the cattle in, and land that hadn't had cattle on them for 15 years, all of a sudden started to come back.
And so of course I've seen the studies, and cattle can do that. I mean, they the perception that they're inherently bad for the land and damaged grassland is not true, and your experience supports that.
Well,
when properly managed.
When properly managed, I mean, side-oats grama, for example, really likes to be clipped. It needs a haircut. There are certain grasses that like it, and there are certain grasses that have rhizomes in the ground, And if you clip them, those give more grasses, so that the grass themselves, many of them really like to have some disturbance, whether it's fire or cattle or something, or just...
Well, also the hoof action to break the surface of the ground, too, is a part of that.
Yes.
Well, you talk about grass, you got Alan's full attention. His favorite.
I brightened up when you start talking about grass, no doubt.
Always interesting.
Well, if you think about it, ungulates have, before the Europeans brought cattle, there were buffalo, deer, elk, etc., that grazed all of this land but didn't overgraze it. Then the Europeans brought cattle in, and some of them overgrazed. Well, sure, you can destroy with overgrazing, but you can also destroy with no grazing. So the proper balance really is what is needed.
So I was under the impression that the border wall for your group was something you tried to stay apolitical on, and then maybe around 2019 that changed. And of course, the wall is pretty controversial. The border's a mess. I think it's hard for anybody to disagree with there's a problem. Why did your group change their philosophy on the wall?
Well, I think we'd been putting in water catchments in various rivers coming from the United States, because the river goes from north to south in our ranches. And we saw the amount of destruction that was going on in these washes. And it just seemed like all our years of work were being torn apart, and it was not favorable. And then we learned how many animals were coming on our ranch. We started putting in cameras, and we started realizing that we had a real treasure here, that this was the heritage of the United States, these animals, that it was a real wildlife corridor. And we realized that all that we'd done to restore a wetlands in San Bernardino, spread the water out from these rivers that were flowing, spread it out over the land. We'd been restoring this wetlands, and the birds had been returning, and the birds were a real treasure, because they winter in Mexico, and then they come up to the States and on to Canada. So we realized that we were in a critical place for migratory birds and migratory animals, and we were in a critical place for restoring the headwaters to the Yaqui River, and all these things were not being considered in the construction of the wall, and we changed our mind.
Because you saw the impact.
The impact, yes.
Overall, my understanding of the history of grazing, so to speak, in Arizona is 1870 census found 5,132 cattle in the entire state. And 1885, 15 years later, the Arizona cattle growers estimated 700,000. 10 more years later, they estimated 1.5 million. And like you said, they didn't know, right? They could have been, this could have been Virginia or something. And so I think it's hard to judge those folks. But is it fair to say that the overgrazing that I think did inarguably occur in that period of time, late 1800s, what you're doing is an effort to reach back to that time? Because everything I've ever read is if we could transfer ourselves back to 1870 Arizona, we'd see a lot flatter ground, not the arroyo cutting, lots more grass, a lot more free-flowing streams, both in the valleys and in the mountains. And what you're doing is trying to, in gross terms, flatten that arroyo cutting back out and slow the water down off the hills and take us back 150 years.
You are correct. And one thing I'd like to add to that is we've reintroduced beavers. Beavers were quite numerous.
Really?
In the areas, that we instead of being hats, and now they're restoring watersheds. So that's.
And they're important in the
they're
establishment
very,
of watersheds.
very important in that. Yes, very important. Yeah. And also, I would say, going back to 1800s, we do not know yet the effects of the wall. I mean, I'm wondering what's going to happen, because when the water comes down, we don't know enough about it. The wall went in. We don't know when the water hits there what's going to happen.
They didn't put pipes through the wall to even slow the water down?
No, they didn't. They didn't. And down below the ground, they'll have a base that goes into the ground, I don't know, maybe 10 feet. And so does the water hit that and underground go way down, and then on the other side of the wall it's going to be bare because there's no roots getting down? We don't know. We're in a position of not knowing. But it's dangerous to go ahead and put something in as large as that without knowing.
Are they still building on the wall right now, or have they stopped?
Well, it's just lately it came out that Biden was going to finish 26 miles in Texas. So otherwise it was stopped. I think that I think this is one of the things that I can't, if I was younger and had more money, this is, I think, such a worthy effort. I think we who are ranchers, it's just a natural, effective way to have long-lasting, significant impact across the board. Whether you're just worried about cattle or you want to see some jaguars or wild turkeys, there's no downside.
There's a solution if we use some of these migrant workers to do the kind of work. A lot of them are not educated people that are coming there. Many are, but some are not. Some are people that are used to farming, that understand, that know how to do it, that this would be a natural to them. We could use some of that labor if we just reorganized our labor laws and put them to work. And it would be the best thing that ranchers could have. I was so fortunate to have those 6 men or 8 men come each year. It was the best investment I made.
And to what extent do you think this applies in the West? I mean, how widespread could these practices apply, do you think?
You mean the putting the gabions in?
Yeah, there's and trincheras, either in both.
I would say in any place where you want to have water. It's just, I mean, if you're in the hills, you have to do one thing because there are trees and rocks there, and you can use if they're in the flats, then you have to have, machinery and build something different. Wherever it is, sometimes you have to make a river meander. Sometimes it's better to put in the gabion and collect the silt so that the river will build up and the water will spill out over the sides. You have to do what each place is different, you have to do.
The land tells you.
Small story to back up what you're just saying. The Gila River ran through part of our ranch, and in my life while I was there, the side washes are steeper than the bottom of the river, so they carry more silt. When it gets down to the river, it slows down and then settles. So the bottom of the river raised about 8 feet during my lifetime.
Wonderful.
Because that's the way it works. I mean, steep, carry a lot, run not so fast in the bottom of the river, and more sand settles out.
Well, while we were listening to Stuart and we were off, you said that at the border, you're in one space that come up from 30 feet.
Oh yeah, I estimate, probably 10 to 15 feet we've raised, and the sides don't come steeply down. They come steep down and then it steps in and goes down again, so that you have vegetation and things growing there, which again slows it down, and you can increase that vegetation and make the water
slow down and penetrate.
Slow down, yeah. and even meander more. But in the beginning, when it's 30 feet deep, you can't make that meander. I mean, it's a different situation. So we wanted to build up the river a little bit, and first, if we could do that.
So Cuenca Los Ojos is a nonprofit, and people can go on your website is
correct.
Cuenca Los Ojos. .org. O-R-G.
Yes, but let's spell Cuenca because people would start with a Q.
Right.
Mm-hmm. C-U-E-N-C-A. Cuenca, which means watershed. Los Ojos of Springs. L-O-S-O-J-O-S.
So C-U-E-N-C-A-L-O-S-O-J-O-S. And then always remember .org, not that other suffix. And people can help. And we didn't even get to talk about the bison and the agaves and all the efforts that are going on in Mexico with Cuenca Los Ojos. So we'll just have to have you back. And people can, are there opportunities to go see, or is that specific trips, or?
Well, we have a discussion now, the new board, different things. For example, people are wanting to bike a lot, and we have trails that we're keeping up, but they want to bike on the trail. So there's a biking group of people. There are people that like glamping. We may, where it's convenient, have that. But basically, we teach. So we have programs where we unify with Borderlands Restoration Network, who have students wanting to learn. They come across the border and they have a 2-week period. We do things with the tribal nations. They come down and they work on the building water catchments.
Do you have programs in the schools?
We do go to schools. I went to a school in California, the New Road School, and the director of Borderlands went with me, and the two of us, he was a Mexican, and I, an old lady, and we sat down and we built structures in the cement walkways with rocks and things, and showed children how to do it. And they loved it.
No kidding.
We had a great time, and we went from the high school all the way down to kindergarten, and we spent the whole day with the New Road School. So yes, we go into schools.
Well, that's a positive way to end. Schools, teaching Cuenca.
Work with the youngsters, as they grow up and don't stay young always. So.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank you very much for both of you.
It's our pleasure.
Joining
Thank
us.
you.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and cowboys, everyone. And remember, cowboy is not a gender. It's a real state of mind. And all of us have a little bit of an inner cowboy in us, and so that's part of what we're here about on the Cowboy Up podcast. I'm Stan Houston, and I come to you occasionally. I'm the one who puts the pieces kind of together as our fine producer, Lynn Wheezy Sneed, makes sure that all the people are ready to go. And I was talking to Stuart Rosebrook just before he had his wonderful promo conversation about True West. And Stuart's quite a historian, and not just Western history, but Arizona and many of the areas, and has a fairly significant degree in that. And he told me that one of his research projects was about Arizona baseball and the history of the Cactus League. And oh, did you get me going on that? Well, that's something you need to talk about because, yes, Arizona is hot in the summer. What do you expect? But now the weather's beginning to moderate, and many of the people are making their way to this, you might say, wonderland of the West. And we've got all kinds of things, including, and I still remember how exciting it was to go to Arizona baseball and see my Chicago Cubs, my childhood team, actually see them play right here in Mesa, Arizona. So it's time for you to start thinking about, hey, as the winter comes, why don't you perhaps make a trip? There's so many things to do, so think about joining us here in the Western Wonderland during perhaps your winter time. And of course, White Stallion Ranch, where this fine program is produced, and many of its related ranches are all ready to give you your inner cowboy experience, your cowboy adventure for you as a couple, maybe to celebrate something, maybe as a family to experience something new. So you start thinking about doing that now. This is the time to make your bookings and to make your plans and plan for a great time together. Reach out to whitestallion.com, whitestallion.com. Not only will they find you a place, perhaps a white stallion or some other place that might be helpful to you, and they can tell you all about the things that could happen right here in Arizona. And my friend Lynn with the famous Tucson Book Festival, she's right there, will not only help you have a good time here with our facilities, we'll make a lot of recommendations about what you can do right here in Arizona land. I'm Stan Houston, and I thank you for the privilege and the pleasure of putting this program together for you.
Well, I heard about the efforts that Valer Clark did at El Coronado, I think when it was sort of new, and this very environmentally active person was just so excited about it and talking about it, and it just immediately sounded interesting, because regardless of how you think it happened or who you want to blame, the overgrazing in the late 1800s combined with those droughts that went into the turn of the century had a huge lasting impact on Arizona and probably even the climate. And so anything that can wind that clock back really has an impact.
This whole arena that we've talked about today about groundwater and saving water and all that is my huge interest I have in that and always have had. And so I was really glad that we were talking about this today, and I want to thank our two guests for telling us a lot of stuff that I should learn.
Yeah, and being part of something that can have dramatic, lasting impact.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in today, and thank you to Stan Houston's production company for bringing these episodes to life. Next week, journalist and documentary filmmaker Erica Bolstad joins us to talk about her book, Windfall, the prairie woman who lost her way and the great-granddaughter who found her. Reviewers have called it shockingly personal, brilliant, and meticulously researched. Be sure to join us for another fascinating talk about the West. Until then, I'm Lynn Weezy Sneed, reminding you to sit tall and ride safe.